Hi, everyone. Welcome and welcome to our guest today, Andreas, who's haven't seen you in a while, but thank you for coming back on. And Andreas is going to walk through a presentation. We're going to discuss a little bit about how to implement effective HR systems, how to build them, and then how to also communicate them to our teams. Because obviously, communication and perception is one of the key things to make sure that we don't lead to complaints and to issues, which is why this is called Beyond Complaints, because I think that's what a lot of HR teams deal with when they implement new HR systems, probably.
Yeah,
So we're going to try and work on how to avoid those situations and get beyond the complaints and get to effective HR systems. So welcome, Andreas, and thanks for coming on again.
thank you, Andrew. Great to be here. Great to see you again.
Good to see you.
It is indeed interesting topic. As all people that implement the HR systems and HR people and management people and project managers, you usually have lots of complaints about the implementation and about the system. But I would like to ask you, Andrew, what are the usual complaints you hear when we implement the system or about the system?
The usual complaints, I would say the usual quote that we get is, yeah, that's great, but can it do this? Or could it do that? This is how we do things now, and this is fine, but can it do it like our old system? Because we
Yeah,
really liked how that worked. And it's like, we really like 90% of things, but this 10%, we'd really like it to do like our old one. So we get that a lot, just as a
yeah.
general complaint that comes at us. Because I
Mhm.
think people are used to those systems and they're worried, like, "Oh, if I have to do this and I'm to train people for this little thing and it just, they see like time being taken up answering questions.
Yeah, right. And also from the how about from the user side, from the employee side?
The biggest complaints I see are usually on like the mobile app that, most of the users, I would say that the end users for HR, a lot of times, at least in our case, they're dealing with our system maybe 5 to 10 minutes a month. It's
Mhm.
usually for absence planning or I need to put in my timesheet. And, you know, it's usually complaints of why is this button here? Or I wish this was faster. Or I
Yeah,
wish I wish I could do this. I wish I could input all my vacations in just one time for the whole year,
yeah,
and I don't have to click over and over. Those are
yeah,
basic things, but obviously in software, there's limitations to how we do things and how systems are built.
yeah. There are lots of complaints from different users, but there are some things that are almost always the same. And that's what I try to compile here from what I hear from people. It's not user friendly, right? So almost every complaint for all systems is that is not user friendly, and it's
Yeah,
probably because we live in an era that Facebook and Instagram, where they feel these systems are quite user friendly for them, and that the rest are not.
yep.
So they have
The
these high expectations of every system.
It's true. There has been the fact that B2C applications are so easy to use, and that they have an army of people behind trying to set up the design and the user experience in a certain way. They
Yeah,
expect the same in their business one, and unfortunately, a lot of times there's companies like ours that we don't have an army of people. We have a handful of people trying to do the best they can.
yeah, and it's like it's designed the whole. Even those applications like Facebook and Instagram are designed for you as a user. So the exact thing you want to do is designed for you only. It's not designed for a million other people that we're
Yep.
going to discuss also in a bit. But and now we have a generation that they're using all the systems before, and they're entering in the corporate world, and then they're disappointed with the systems that they see. Where in the
Yeah.
past, the only way to see a system was entering a corporate world. So that's quite also high expectations from the new generations, that they want to see better and better quality systems that are designed for them.
I agree.
Yeah, so user friendliness, and it's quite a big topic. Then the other topic is it cannot do what I want it to do. So you have a system probably is used by the whole organization. In our case, an HR system. So you have managers using it, employee using it, top management using it. All the roles in the organization are using it. So let's say in the case of HR, someone was to have a payroll report, someone was to have an absence report, someone was to customize a certain task to be done in a certain way, someone was to have a special feature. So it's quite difficult to please them all. So you usually have lots of people complaining, like, yeah, but in my case, it cannot do this specific thing that I wanted to do, right?
Yeah. HR systems are there. I mean, we did an analysis on this. It's one of the few pieces of software that everyone in an organization uses. Like you can think of all the project management softwares. Other than email, usually everyone has the same email client and everyone has the same HR system in the whole organization. Other than that, there's always systems within teams. Each team has their own way of doing things, but it's one of the few things that everyone touches.
Exactly. And there's so many different views on how to do this simple stuff that are serving you. So I want to see my absences in a certain way. I want to manage my team's absences in a certain way. But it cannot be. You cannot have a special view for every manager for
Yeah.
every for everything. So
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
you get those complaints almost always.
Yep.
Then, as we said, right? So there are many tasks that can be automated. So someone has a role. They're using the system as an employee, as a manager, as an HR, and they say, "Hey, maybe we can automate this task or implement it in a different way," right? But the reality is that the system, we can automate all things really if we put our heads down, but some things have priority over others, right?
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
So you hear that a lot also from people, but why do we have to do this? Maybe it can be done in a better way. So it's another usual complaint.
The other issue with automation, at least that I've seen, is that if you automate something, it's usually hard to turn it off. And if there are hiccups in a certain workflow or changes sometimes, the automation ends up being double the work to stop it or to make it so it follows that. So we always say, whenever you're automating something, make sure this really is something that you never have to touch, because
Yeah,
otherwise it's going to be
something for the
complicated
long
to
term,
fix.
right?
Yeah,
Something
yeah,
that
yeah,
you sustainable going to use it. You really want that you're not going to change it anytime soon.
yeah,
Yeah, the other one is limited customization, which the reality it might be that there is no limited customization. It might be limited on how many different things we will customize. And
yeah,
it's what you also mentioned before. Like people are usually looking for ways to execute their task like they are doing it now manually, and do it in a system instead of figure out new ways to implement their outcome through the
yep.
system and the capabilities of the system.
Yep, absolutely. I think we obviously have a product that's pretty customizable compared to others that are out there. And one of
Yeah.
the difficult things we find is that people end up wanting to customize a lot to fit those things, but then they get scared when they see the budget of what it might cost to actually follow those. And what we try to say is like, well, we've been doing this for 12 years, and we know some of these systems work because we've been taking hundreds of other people's systems and improving ours with it. And so we try to encourage them to do it. But I mean, the bigger the organizations, the harder it is to do that. Like as you get to organizations that are a few thousand people, they have the way they like doing it, or the HR person likes doing it. And even if you know that this is the better way of doing it, they say like, well, I don't want to go through the training of having to change all these workflows. So I'd rather
Mhm.
do it this way, no matter what it costs us. And that creates an imbalance too, because you're charging people for something, and you
Yeah.
want to make sure they're happy. And every time something costs a little bit more, the
Mhm.
degree of excellence goes up. You need to make sure that it really works well.
Yeah, and actually, the reality from my experience is that you even if you have lots of room for customization without even development or cost, people might get confused on how many options you have to do a
Yeah,
certain thing in different ways. So it's it's maybe easier to have fewer options that actually work very well and give it to
I
them
agree.
rather than having tons of options.
Yeah, I agree. I usually tend to like the simplicity of things, but
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
not always the solution that every HR team wants to go with, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yes. True. That's true. Good. So here, what I wanted us to go through are the usual complaints.
Yeah.
And this is like the outcome. After an implementation of a system, usually that's what we get. Of course, you get those and even more during an implementation. And before an implementation, you don't get really anything.
Yeah.
So you get that in implementation and after.
Yeah, yeah. You usually even if you've walked through tons of demos, explained everything, everyone knows exactly what the system does, and then you get to the implementation, they're like, "Well, why does it do this?" And you're like,
Exactly, yeah. So that's what. Yeah, one more thing that I forgot. Usually one of the complaints is someone wants to complain about something, they want to suggest about something, they want to really understand why the system it is how it is, and there's no one person having the overview for the whole system. So it's quite hard for people to deal with it, because then they feel that there's no logic behind it, or there's no purpose. That no one knows really why we have it and why we have these problems or why we don't improve it.
"Yep,
So
I
that
agree."
and I find that to be the most reasonable complaint, because
Yeah,
even if you have problems, you need to have someone to go to.
yep. No, and
Yeah.
it's difficult. I mean, even companies need to think about this before they're implementing these, because we have this issue where the person that sold the product is maybe the HR team, maybe the IT team, but the
Mhm.
person that implements it is like a project manager, like you said, somebody
Mhm.
that's kind of like a third party that's really just an observer to make sure that this gets implemented. And then the
Yeah.
real question is who's responsible for now and who's responsible for after the implementation. And then it gets really confusing. It's like, well, why did the project manager do this? This isn't the scope that I said. And
Mhm.
yeah, we've seen that a lot of times, that, project managers are the best people for these, but oftentimes they might miss something and you're playing telephone. And then it's like, who are we talking to now? Even for us, like, who are we talking to now as the
Yeah.
point of contact?
It's a great point. You usually have, it's an HR department, then it's the IT department, and there's a project management department. And in my view, the owner from the beginning should be someone in HR, because
Yeah.
project management will at some point leave. They will run other projects after the implementation. IT, they don't really know your needs. They know some capabilities, some technical features and capabilities of the system that can serve you. Whatever you tell them, they will do.
Yeah.
So they will try to accommodate your technical needs, really, and review and understand some technical stuff. So in my view, you should always keep the responsibility within the department that owns the actual system, which is HR.
Yep. No,
and
no, I
and
agree.
the and then this will change over time, like any system. Like accounting system should be owned by accounting, it shouldn't be owned by
Yep.
IT or project management.
I agree.
Yeah.
And we usually see, even when IT is running something, and IT, for example, was the buyer, and they basically say to HR, like, this is your new system, it's almost always a disaster because they had very little say. They're the ones that have to use it. But yeah, it's a square peg in a round hole that you're like, you have to go back and redo
Yeah.
things and fix things. And you're like, well, why weren't you involved from the beginning? They're like, well, IT just said we had to use this system. And you say, well, that's that's a big problem.
Exactly. So if the decision making, the whole ownership needs to be under a certain department, and I think it should be under HR in this case,
I agree. I agree.
one way or another. Okay. So how do we end up in these complaints? Beforehand we try to implement the system.
Well,
So
because
we
they
decided
don't they didn't choose Lanteria. That's the reason that they end up in this problem.
that true. So yeah. So what you usually do is you review requirements. You identify requirements. You find the budget. You talk with various stakeholders. You decide which problems to tackle, and you communicate expectations. And this is quite important, because you can find a million of problems to tackle and things that you want to do. You can have a lot of expectations, but you need to decide them according to your budget and according to priority. What you want to
Yeah.
do right now, this year, next year, in 3 years. So your success is really defined by what you are saying you're going to implement. if you are saying we're going to implement a full-fledged HR system, it's quite difficult to do it in 1 year. You need lots of resources and everyone buying to do that. So whatever you do from here really defines what complaints you will get at the end.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So then you do your research, you review your vendors, you decide a suitable one, you find your pros and cons, because everyone has pros and cons, right? So um, even if with the cons, at least you know the limitations of the system, and you can, maybe you want to buy a supplementary system for some of the features, or you want to integrate some things. But again, you need to know what you want and what are the top priorities, so you choose the right system.
I agree.
Like Lanteria, right, is an excellent system for 100 people and like more. It's a system for many people. If you have 3-5 people, maybe it's not the right choice to choose Lanteria
For sure.
for your needs.
For
So
sure. And we try to communicate that up front too. We try not to take those things on.
Yeah, but if you're planning to go to 100 people very soon in the next 2 years, you might fall in a trap if you go and find a system that is for 3-5 people, and then it doesn't fulfill your needs in 1 year's time.
I agree.
So it's quite important that you know what you want and you set the parameters of success about your HR department.
Yeah.
And then you communicate what you're trying to do and try to implement that, of course. You communicate to the people, hey, this is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to implement an absence plan, a core HR, a performance management review for how many people. And this way, it makes it easier. So for that reason, I just prepare a small list, what you need to do before, during, and after an implementation. But I would like to hear more from you, Andrew, because you see a lot of the before and the during, I guess, but maybe not so much the after as Lanteria. So what do you see it's usually needed more to be done in the before implementation time, in the research time?
I would say the two things. I mean, one is make sure you know how to do the research of these things. I'd say when people are looking at, a lot of people just look at these check boxes that are on a lot of websites that show like, hey, here's our features. But each feature, like, I mean, employee absence plans, that's a feature or a module that can be done so differently across the different areas that it's worth spending time testing the product, going into the demos, really like seeing how this works for each level, all the different managers. I would say that's one of the key things that people don't do enough. I mean, what you said before, the system owner, like what you mentioned here, making sure you know clearly beforehand, knowing clearly the types of integrations you need, the types of products that are going to work with this, the teams that are going to work with this is a super key thing. I mean, we get a lot of people that get even to the end of the sales process and we start asking questions and they disappear for a month to go recollect the information. And even then, after we do the sale and sign on it, we get into implementation, and then there's a whole other host of things that they didn't even think about that we start asking, and it's just not thought out yet. So, it's easier when someone comes from like already having a system that they don't like, and they're like, this just isn't working for us. They know what they don't like, and they're a little bit more informed. The issue is in the cases you're talking about where it's like, we're just getting a little too big for the system we have now and we need something new. Then a lot of times what you run into is they don't even know what they don't know. It's like, I don't even know what this system could do, what's possible. And so we get into implementation and we start showing we could do this, we can do that. And all of a sudden they say, oh, I love that. But all of a sudden we've gone over budget by a ton because that wasn't really budgeted at the beginning. So we do try and go, our demos, we try and go pretty deep into like all the different features so then they can decide. But that also, you're trying to sell. So you don't want to all of a sudden take the whole sale off the rails and say, they're like, wait a second, it can do this. Hang on, we need to go spend the next month discussing if we want that. And so, there's a delicate balance from a sales perspective where what we try to do now is we try and get people stood up into our system with the basic minimum viable product. And we say from there, here's the bigger things we can do, but let's, get the system stood up. Let's get you onboarded. And then from there, we can kind of build out the more complex things in the future. but we try and do that, and then we do see the after, but it's more in complaints or issues or bugs or things that pop
Yeah,
up,
true.
or new use case. So people, they want to implement LMS now. They've been using core HR, they've been using attendance. Now they want to implement LMS, and so we do see the after because we start talking about the new thing they want to use, what they didn't like in the current one, what we could do to make them work better. But you're
Mhm.
right, it's not as day to day. It's not spending 40 hours a week working with the team. It's more of 2 hours
Yeah,
here and there.
yeah. It's interesting all the points you made, and I really like that you need to figure out what the system is able to do and what not to do.
Yeah,
And in my, of course, the system owner is non-negotiable, right? If you don't have one, it's
yeah,
like a guarantee issues at least
yeah,
along the way.
yeah,
You might be able to do it, but it will be a very rocky ride.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Um,
if you don't have the owner and somebody that really knows how these systems work, I mean, you might have somebody that's come from a smaller system and they say, "Well, we just want to run our payroll through here, and we just want
yeah,
to run our payroll and our attendance." And then they start seeing all the other things and employee engagement and all this other stuff, and they get overwhelmed
yeah.
and really can't dig into it. But they bought it, and now yeah. I mean, we run into that sometimes where people don't really know how to use certain modules or implement them,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
it creates dissatisfaction because they say, well, I'm paying for this, I want to do this, but I really don't know how to use it. Like, I don't know how to
yeah,
do good employee engagement surveys.
yeah. And I think what's happening there, Andrea, as well, is most companies they don't really have processes
Yeah,
before that.
yeah,
So even before they come to here, it's not that they have a process and they want to change it. So when you have a system, obviously you need a robust
yeah,
process to maintain. Otherwise, you run into issues of data quality is not really used the proper
yeah,
way and all of that. So my suggestion is as much as possible when you on the before you even go to implement your system and choose it, when you see the capabilities of the system, really design a process and go to the stakeholders, right? So how will we work an absence plan? A very simple thing. How will we request absences? Who is approving
yeah,
what? How it's going to work? Is it really how we want it to be? Can the system really accommodate that? And will people actually do it? And can we
yeah,
maintain it? Then if you actually have the process and you communicate it and all people look like, makes sense, we love it, let's do it that way, it's much easier in the implementation. And in the after, you don't get many complaints because people already know how it will look like in the future. This is
yeah,
how the process looks like. So it's quite important to do it. What people usually do well is they like to train people, but there is no process to train them for.
yeah,
So it's quite you train them to be quite flexible in using the system and not maintaining it properly and
yeah.
not working for their advantage.
No, I agree. And it ends up being a good moment, I think, for people to really reflect on the organization too, and to spend some
Mm.
time thinking through these systems and thinking through it because you it is an inflection point a lot of times. It's this isn't working or we're growing too fast or whatever. I mean, we've had
Mhm.
companies that have come in and they've realized through just the structure of the system, they don't even know how their org chart works, like who's reporting to who. And you say, well, who's going to be the person that manages the HR? And they're like, well, you. And they're like, well, maybe it should be this person. And even just the org chart gets, we've
Yeah.
had several cases where we end up waiting a month in implementation because they have to go back and redesign their org chart. And
Yeah.
it's good to do that before you get into implementation.
I often say that it's not. I've seen in not in HR but other systems that I'm doing consulting in other companies. You can see a system that looks very old, and you're like, oh, really? Do these systems really exist? But when the people start working it really works because
Yeah.
there is a robust process behind it.
Yeah.
So all reports, everything is working end to end, right? Data going in, invoices going out, customers happy, everyone is happy. And then you might see these fancy systems that they have huge capabilities, tech, artificial intelligence, everything, but then they don't have a robust system,
Yeah.
a robust process. So nothing really works anyway. So it's really important to have the right process and the right
Yeah.
structure around it to have a system working. It's not the system, it's really the process most of the time. And something I think is really important during the implementation is if you have a map what you're going to implement and when and exactly the implementation and the right resources, is to communicate all the time what you're doing.
Yeah.
And reinforce the message again and again. Hey guys, we are not implementing this grande magic system to do everything for us. We are implementing these modules for this year that when we implement them, they will be able to do this and this with this process.
Yep.
And then you have a success. So what usually we do, we go and say, hey guys, we're implementing a full HR CRM. It's going to do everything for us. And then people have all this expectation. You run something out and they're like, yeah, but how we do performance management, or how do we document our personal improvement plan, or how would we document our learning? And nobody has all these answers because they just implement one or two modules that are very different from those.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
Right. So, but it's important to communicate the potential that here's what we're going to do, and gray out the other areas. Yes, we can do all this stuff, but to do them, we need to do this stuff and make them work really well.
Yeah, and build up on layers of things. I mean, I think it's not worth tackling everything. It's better to say like, hey, what is our MVP? What does this look like? What does that look like? Because we get a lot of people that get stuck in implementation because they're trying to do everything at once, or they try and jump over here and then they jump over there and they jump over here. And I mean, we try to preach of saying like, hey, let's get this done, and then let's get this done, and then you're in the system and it works, and then we can add more layers. But a lot of times it's really hard because people want to get everything done. They don't want to go live until everything's ready, and you say, well, that might take a while, and then there's frustration.
Yeah, and if you do it one by one and you do it right, there is a momentum. People trust the system, they trust the process, they trust the stakeholders. It works for that particular thing you designed and implemented it. So you build some trust, and then they're like, okay, let's do the other thing right. Let's start automating other things. Let's do the performance management module. Let's do the learning module, and then it really works if you do it one by one properly. Break it down into pieces and run it. Okay, then we have the after, right? So maintain processes. Once you have the process designed and once you implement it, if you are able to maintain it, I think that's probably 80% of it. So you will not get complaints because people already know what the system is designed to do, what the processes are designed to do. And if you actually implement them, you know how they're working. Of course, you might got the process wrong. You might need to change it. The system maybe can be more efficient that you already knew, and you have to change it, and that's okay. And that's where the system owner comes, right? So there needs to be a room, there needs to be a person, a forum, something that you can go and say, hey guys, we want to improve this.
And I would say documenting these processes too, and making sure everything's well documented, because the biggest issues we run into when the biggest churn we get from customers or people that are most upset is when there's a new HR person that comes in. When somebody leaves and somebody else comes in, or a new layer comes in, even saying, hey, we need to scale up and we need a head of people instead of a HR manager. And that's where the biggest headaches come in midstream, because it's not well documented, it's not laid out, and people get frustrated and they end up switching systems a lot of times, or starting from zero, and all that investment goes away because you say like, I don't want to deal with this. Let's just go find a new one.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I also have there remind why the system works like it is implemented in this way. So it's you need to. New people will come, new people will ask things. So why do we have this? Why does it work like that? It was designed for these purposes, right? We cannot start blaming a system. It's just a random technology, we're blaming it. We designed in a certain way for certain reasons, we implemented certain processes. So we actually, the people, decided to do this. And it's getting us those outputs. If we need different outputs, then we need to have different processes and we need to give different inputs. So let's change that. It's not the actual system usually that is the problem.
I agree.
Yeah. And it's always good to have this in an annual forum with like major stakeholders of the system that
Yeah.
really affects them, their day to day and their productivity and their quality of work. And hold that forum, review actually what you're doing. Maybe you decide to implement more modules. This is where you, right? I have the complaints again here. So this is
Yeah.
if you decide like, okay, I need customization, yes, maybe it can be in that forum, right? We need more reporting, cool. Maybe we discuss it in that forum as well. The special features, the tasks that need to be automated. If we need to be user friendly, fair, user friendly for who, right? So many stakeholders in a system like an HR system, user friendly for which module, which role, what do we need to have here, and what do we mean by user friendly.
Yeah. 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 User friendly is hard to define sometimes, for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a wide range of user friendliness.
Yeah, and I really think is the usage that we all do in social media. That's what we
Yeah.
consider user friendly, where we just want to scroll or browse mindlessly at something,
Yep.
which, which is not the actual purpose of usually systems at work.
Yep. No, absolutely. That's definitely something people need to have conscious.
Yeah. So that was it. That were my thoughts about how we can implement better systems in the before, during, and after, and how we can avoid having these complaints, or you cannot avoid having them, but at least
Yeah.
uh, try to prevent them or have the answer to it
Yeah.
before they come.
No, those are good. Those are good points. I'm going to make sure that we post specifically these five because I think these are totally right, and it's given me some thought on like how we should communicate this to people beforehand. Because I mean, we're in business of selling, and so we always want to make sure that we're pushing things towards the finish line. But
Mhm.
I mean, we have in the sales process, we do try and be as conscious as possible and asking people questions, making sure that they have some of these things
Mhm.
and doing it as early as possible because I've seen it too many times that you sign the contract, you get into the implementation. That's where the frustration really is. And what you
Mhm.
want is just a full seamless process where, you're not having to figure this out in the middle. And, we have companies that take a long time to implement their product, not because it's tough, but because they just don't have the answers to the questions.
Yeah, and most of the times, I guess, without knowing Andrew the full picture of all of the trends, but I will guess they're struggling internally how to manage this project,
Yeah.
what they really want, and what they want to implement, and where to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't clear. I mean, like anything, you want to have a goal, an ultimate objective, and
Hmm.
then along the way you're building up to that goal with what you do. And I think a lot of people don't have that, or their expectations are just that we need software, we need to check the box,
Yeah.
and let's go find something, and it'll work. We've had that. We actually had a company that we had to stop an implementation last year, and the pre-sale was like a few weeks. It was like nothing, and they were a big company, and we kind of kept saying to them like, "Are you sure about this? Are you sure? Like, have you gone through this?" And they're like, "Yeah." And then we got into implementation, and there was like absolutely no idea. And they were like, "Why doesn't it do this?" And they thought they were just going to get like a simple piece of software like Zoho that
Yeah.
was super easy to pull out of the box. And you say, "Well, this is a complex software that we built and we work with." But there's different options for everyone.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I recently purchased some marketing design services.
Yeah,
And I got to this person, we were discussing, and they were asking me questions for 3 days. I was so frustrated, right? So I was like, come on, how can you ask all these questions for 3 days?
yeah,
And then I just went through it. I answered all the questions, and I thought maybe he's just too detail oriented or something.
yeah,
But then in 24 hours, I got exactly what I wanted.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it was so important to clarify. He was actually, I didn't even know what I wanted. I just wanted something that from the questions they just narrowed down, managed my expectations because they ensured that's what I want, and then
yeah.
boom, delivered in 24 hours. I was like, okay, this makes sense actually.
Yeah. No, that's one of the key things in outsourcing anything or delegating things is always like it's really good to have a clear vision, because you can hire people that there are professionals that you just say to them like, I kind of want something like this, and they're good enough, and that's why you
Yeah.
pay them a ton of money, and they're
Mhm.
good enough to just go off on their own. But others know that, if I get asked the right questions and I get a clear roadmap, then I will be able to do this, and it makes it way easier to outsource things to people at an affordable price.
Yeah, makes sense.
Well, cool, Andreas. Thank you so much for this. This actually gave me some things to think about too, in our way of
Great.
doing things. Just thinking out loud. So this was awesome. Thank you so much for preparing this and thinking through this. And we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Andrew. Talk soon.